Alright everyone, find a comfortable spot, maybe dim the lights a little for this one. Tonight, we are stepping back into the shadows. We're going to explore the American 1920s. But we won't be visiting the grand ballrooms or the halls of power. Instead, we'll be in the damp basements and hidden alleys. You're going to feel what it was really like to live on the other side of the law. Now, when you think of prohibition, what comes to your mind? You probably picture hidden bars with smooth jazz music pouring out. You see people in sharp suits and elegant dresses, whispering a password at a secret door. You might even think of the famous names, like Al Capone. Here was a man who built a criminal empire reportedly worth over $100 million back then. But here's the thing we often forget. The truth was, for every celebrity gangster, there were thousands of regular people. And for them, bootlegging wasn't about glamour. It was a dangerous, daily grind. While the papers talked about gangsters, a quiet epidemic was unfolding. Historians estimate that as many as 50,000 people died from contaminated liquor during this era. That's the part of the story we're going to explore. So tonight, this journey is about you. We are going to place you directly into the life of an ordinary bootlegger. You are going to feel the damp chill of a secret basement on your skin. You'll smell the sharp, chemical fumes coming from a makeshift still. We're going to focus on the quiet reality of this deadly new profession. We'll look at the choices people had to make, and the risks they simply had to accept. Don't worry, we'll move through it all at a calm pace. There are no jump scares here, just the steady, quiet story of survival. If you're ready, just get comfortable. There's nothing else you need to do. Our story begins on a cold winter's day. A day when an entire country went dry, and your new career was born. Picture this. It's January 16th, 1920. You wake up in your small city apartment. The air is cold and smells faintly of coal smoke from the tenement next door. But something fundamental has shifted overnight. The government has just flipped a switch. The 18th Amendment is now the law of the land. Your skills as a bartender, once a respectable trade, are now federal crimes. Welcome to Prohibition. You are now an outlaw. Now, this wasn't some minor inconvenience. An entire industry was born in the shadows, almost instantly. By the late 1920s, historians tell us there were over 32,000 speakeasies in New York City alone. You could hardly walk a block without passing a secret door. The money involved was staggering. This new underground economy was worth about $3.6 billion a year. That's over $50 billion in today's money. It was an entire shadow nation of brewers, drivers, and lookouts. And you're standing right at the entrance. So, you have a decision to make. What type of bootlegger will you be? Imagine the damp, cool air of an Appalachian cave. You could be a rural moonshiner, tending to a copper still by the soft glow of a fire. Or picture the musty smell of a city basement. You could be an urban distributor, bottling spirits while the rumble of a streetcar passes overhead. Perhaps you prefer the cold spray of the Great Lakes on your face. You could be a maritime smuggler, your boat's hull creaking under the weight of Canadian whiskey. Your choice will define your life and your risks. The equipment death trap now. Let's talk about your new workplace safety standards. To put it simply, there are none. Your new job requires a distillery, and you have to build it yourself. That shiny condenser coil, essential for cooling the alcohol vapor. For you, it's a salvaged car radiator. You don't know it yet, but it's slowly leaching lead into every batch you make. It's poisoning your customers, and it's poisoning you. Imagine your office is a damp basement or a hidden cave. The air is heavy and thick with chemical fumes. There's no ventilation. There is no safety equipment, and certainly no medical backup if things go wrong. You can taste the raw alcohol on your tongue just from breathing. But here's the thing about your work. It's fundamentally explosive. Ethanol vapor, the very thing you are producing, can ignite at just 173 degrees Fahrenheit. And you are standing right next to an open flame. The truth was, death by explosion was a constant, quiet fear. In 1932, a young man in Indiana named William L. Ford learned this firsthand. He was only 26 years old. According to reports, he was burned alive when a keg he was working on suddenly exploded. This wasn't a rare accident. This was a daily workplace hazard. For you, every single day is a gamble. You are one stray spark, one faulty valve, away from the exact same fate. Somehow, you just learn to live with it. Now, you have a new business rival, and it's the United States government. They're furious that people are still drinking. So they decide to make the industrial alcohol you're stealing deadly. Officially, it's called denaturation. It's a national policy. They order companies to add poison to their products. We're talking about things like methanol, pyridine, and even benzene. Your raw material is now literally weaponized. By 1926, the government perfects what they call Formula 5. It's a mix of chemicals so toxic that just 3 drinks can cause permanent blindness. A few more can stop your heart. The chief medical examiner in New York at the time didn't mince words. He called the program a national experiment in extermination. And you, whether you know it or not, are the final link in that chain. You are the one pouring the poison. Welcome to New Year's Day, 1927. As you wake up, you hear the news. The city's hospitals are overflowing. At Bellevue Hospital alone, 41 people have died overnight from poisoned liquor. You feel a cold knot in your stomach. They died from the same kind of industrial alcohol you've been buying and bottling. For the first time, you truly realize the truth of your situation. You're not just a lawbreaker anymore. You are a potential distributor of government-made poison. The casualty count grows, and the numbers just keep growing. In 1926 alone, in New York City, at least 400 people are confirmed dead from poisoned alcohol. Another 1,200 are sickened, many with permanent damage. This is the reality behind the Roaring Twenties. It's a quiet, invisible plague spreading through the speakeasies. Through it all, people kept drinking, and bootleggers kept selling. They had to. Conservative estimates from historians suggest that at least 10,000 Americans died directly from the government's poisoning program. Some researchers believe the true number is much, much higher. And that's not even counting the additional 40,000 people who experts believe died from other kinds of contamination. Things like lead poisoning, bacteria, and other toxins from makeshift stills. Each death was a quiet tragedy, often blamed on the victim's own choices. The Jamaica ginger paralysis then, in 1930, your worst nightmare is realized in a new and terrifying way. It comes from a product called Jamaica ginger, or Jake, for short. It was a patent medicine with high alcohol content. 2 shady operators, Harry Gross and Max Reisman, decided to cut their costs. They added a cheap industrial chemical to their Jake. It was a plasticizer, something used to make things flexible. They had no idea what it would do. The result was catastrophic. Somewhere between 30,000 and 50,000 people were permanently paralyzed from the waist down. You start to see them on the streets. They walk with a distinctive shuffling gait because they can't lift their feet. Their toes drag on the ground. It becomes known across the country as the Jake Walk. It's a constant, visible reminder of the danger lurking in every unregulated bottle. But here's the thing you carry with you every day. You're not immune to your own product. You're breathing in toxic vapors for hours at a time. One careless sip from a contaminated batch could paralyze you, or blind you, or worse. And all the while, that makeshift car radiator is still there. It's still part of your process, slowly adding lead to your system with every run. So the next time you see a craft cocktail bar, with its clean pipes and measured pours, just take a moment, and remember the quiet risks that lurked inside every single bottle. Now, even in this dangerous world, there were legends. You would have heard the stories whispered in speakeasies, stories about a man named George Remus. They called him the King of the Bootleggers. Picture this: an empire worth $40 million, built in just 3 years. He employed 3,000 people, and, according to historians, controlled nearly a third of all the illegal alcohol in America. He was the dream. He was the man everyone, including you, wanted to be. But here's the thing about being the king. It was unbelievably expensive. Evidence suggests that Remus spent a full 50% of his staggering income on bribes and protection. Imagine half of every dollar you earn being handed over just to stay in business. The equipment was another constant drain. Every time the feds raided a warehouse, you had to replace everything. And then there were the legal fees. A single court case could cost $10,000. Your profits were always bleeding out. In the end, the money couldn't protect him. While Remus was in prison, his own wife and a federal agent worked together to liquidate his entire fortune. When he was finally released, the king of the bootleggers had only $100 to his name. The crushing weight of that betrayal and ruin drove him to a final, tragic act. He murdered his wife. It wasn't a glamorous gangster tale. It was a story of total financial and personal destruction. Your daily financial pressures now, let's bring it back to your small operation. You weren't George Remus, but you faced the same pressures every single day. Imagine the makeshift still you built in your basement. It's your entire investment. Between 1921 and 1925, federal agents seized and destroyed nearly 700,000 stills just like yours. A single raid could wipe you out completely. There was no insurance to call. There was no legal recourse. You just watched months of work get smashed to pieces. And then there was the corruption tax. It was an unspoken, but very real, part of your budget. In Philadelphia, one magistrate reportedly took in almost $88,000 in bribes in just 10 months. That's over $1 million today. You'd hear stories of police officers, men earning maybe $4,000 a year, having over 200 sitting in their bank accounts. You weren't paying for protection. You were just paying to be left alone for one more day. The cost to even operate legitimately was crippling. One of the best ways to get alcohol was to buy a wholesale drug company. This gave you a license to purchase spirits for medicinal purposes. But getting that license required a bribe. We're talking about a $22,000 bribe in 1920s money. So the next time you think of the Roaring Twenties, don't picture glamour. Picture the constant grinding pressure. You weren't building an empire. You were just trying to survive until the next shakedown. Now, if you were a bootlegger in a place like Chicago, your city transformed, picture this. You're just trying to run your small operation, maybe out of a basement or a garage. But all around you, a war is raging. Historians tell us there were over 1,300 gangs operating in the city by the mid-1920s. This wasn't some distant problem. This was your daily reality. Every car that backfired on your street made you jump. The homicide rate in the country would eventually peak. This was the world you were navigating. Your daily life became a threat assessment. Rival gangs wanted your territory, hijackers wanted your shipments, and corrupt officials wanted your money. Then came February 14, 1929. The news spreads through the city like a cold wind. You hear about 7 men, lined up against a garage wall and executed. The killers were disguised as police officers. Imagine the chilling effect of that knowledge. The very people meant to uphold the law could be the ones holding a machine gun. The trust in any kind of authority just evaporated. The weapon they used, the Thompson submachine gun, becomes a symbol of the era. You hear it nicknamed the Chicago typewriter. The sound of its rapid fire becomes the soundtrack to this new, brutal kind of warfare. This is the world you now inhabit. You start to notice a grim pattern. The men who rise to the top of this business don't last long. Take Charles Don O'Banion. He was a powerful North Side leader, running his operations from a flower shop. One day, he shot 7 times right there amongst the flowers. Then his successor, Jaime Weiss, is machine-gunned on a cold sidewalk outside his own headquarters. The truth was, leadership was a death sentence. The average lifespan of a major gang leader was measured in months, not years. For you, the small-time operator, it's a terrifying lesson. Success doesn't bring you safety. It just paints a bigger target on your back. But here's the thing you learn very quickly. The greatest threat isn't always a bullet from a rival. It's a quiet whisper from someone you know. Welcome to your new paranoid reality. Everyone is a potential informant. The neighbor who reports the strange smells from your basement. The employee you hired, hoping to get a reduced sentence by turning you in. A cash reward could even turn a family member against you. Your world shrinks into a tiny circle of trust, and even that feels fragile. You also face an impossible choice when it comes to the law. You can't trust an honest cop, because it's his job to arrest you. But you can't fully trust a corrupt cop either. He might take your bribe, but he could also be setting you up for a rival gang. Or maybe he's taking money from both sides. Evidence suggests this was common. In New York City alone, 138 federal prohibition agents were fired for corruption in a single year. You are caught in the middle of it all, with no one to truly rely on. Perhaps you would hear the cautionary tale of George Remus, the so-called king of the bootleggers. While he was in prison, the federal agent investigating him started an affair with his wife. Together, they systematically sold off every piece of his empire, leaving him with nothing. The betrayal was so complete it shattered him. It's a story that confirms your deepest fears. If a man that powerful could be brought down by those closest to him, what chance did you have? And then there was Detroit's infamous Purple Gang. For a time, they were the most feared organization in the Midwest. They controlled the flow of liquor from Canada and were known for their absolute ruthlessness. But in the end, they weren't taken down by the police or their rivals. They destroyed themselves. The paranoia and suspicion grew until it boiled over. At the Collingwood Manor massacre, 3 of their own members were lured to a peace conference and executed by their associates. It was a perfect, tragic example of how this life corrodes everything. Even the strongest alliances, in the end, could rot from the inside out. Now, it wasn't just a few local police you had to worry about. The truth was, you were fighting a fully funded government war machine. Picture this. There's an entire federal agency, the Bureau of Prohibition, with about 4,000 agents dedicated to shutting you down. Over the years, they would make more than 500,000 arrests, and if you were one of them, your chances weren't good. They had a conviction rate of nearly 2/3. You weren't just a small-time criminal, you were a national priority, and the government was spending a fortune to stop you. Their annual budget for enforcement grew to over $13 million. But here's the thing, that wasn't all. The Coast Guard was spending an additional $13 million a year just to patrol the waters. In total, the government spent over $300 million throughout the era just for enforcement. Imagine you're small, hidden still. Its value is a few $100s, and it's being hunted by a federal budget of millions. Somehow, you had to believe you wouldn't get caught. Then, you start to hear stories about a special team in Chicago. They are your worst nightmare. They are federal agents, led by a man named Elliot Ness, who simply cannot be bribed. They become known as the Untouchables. You hear how in just 6 months, they destroyed $500,000 worth of illegal operations. They cost the Capone organization alone about $2 million in lost revenue. You realize you can't buy your way out of this problem. This enemy plays by a different set of rules. And to make things worse, they have better tools than you. The government is using new technology like wiretapping to listen to your phone calls. They coordinate their raids with multiple agencies using radio communication and even aircraft for surveillance. Imagine looking up into the sky and wondering if that small plane is watching you. The game is changing. You're not just hiding from a man in a car anymore. You're hiding from a modern, technologically advanced surveillance state. If your business is on the water, you have a different kind of federal agent to fear. Welcome to the Rum Patrol. The Coast Guard now has over 200 patrol boats and even 25 old Navy destroyers just to catch people like you. And they are not just there to make arrests. You hear about the Black Duck incident where Coast Guard sailors opened fire with a machine gun, killing 3 unarmed smugglers. This wasn't a police action. It was a deadly cat-and-mouse game on the high seas. Your nights are filled with the roar of your boat's engine, pushing through the dark water. But you're always listening for the sound of a faster, more powerful vessel. Along the coast, the morning tide sometimes reveals the evidence of a failed run. The shore is littered with broken bottles from a sunken ship. It's a constant reminder of the risk. A reminder that a fortune in whiskey, and maybe the men who carried it, can be lost to the cold, dark water in an instant. Now, the dangers you faced depended entirely on where you set up shop. Picture this. You are an Appalachian moonshiner. Your workplace is a hidden hollow deep in the mountains. The air is so cold in the winter that it hurts to breathe. You're constantly worried that the smoke from your fire will give you away to a revenuer miles away. This isn't just a business for you. Evidence suggests it was often a family tradition passed down through generations. A dangerous but proud inheritance. The biggest danger you face out here is isolation. If you get hurt, the nearest doctor could be days away on foot. Every piece of your equipment, the heavy copper pot and the sacks of corn, had to be carried through miles of treacherous terrain, and the weather itself is a constant threat. A sudden snowstorm could trap you in your hideout for weeks, trapped with no supplies and a product you can't sell. Through it all, you just had to manage. But maybe you chose the city. Welcome to your urban operation, hidden in the basement of a crowded tenement building. Your enemy isn't the terrain, it's the people all around you. You live in constant fear of a neighbor reporting the strange smells or the sound of your still. Even the building inspector could be a federal informant. The very structure you're in is a threat. You worry the heavy equipment might cause the floor to collapse, or that one spark could set the old wooden building on fire. In a city like Chicago, you might have been part of a network like the one run by the Genna brothers. They gave home stills to hundreds of poor Italian families who would cook the alcohol for them. It seemed like a good deal. But you were completely dependent on their raw materials. If they gave you tainted industrial alcohol, you would be the one producing poison that could blind or kill your customers. You were a small, replaceable part in a very dangerous machine. Perhaps you chose the water, smuggling across the Great Lakes. Imagine the icy wind on Lake Michigan during a winter storm. Your small boat feels like a toy in the massive, churning waves. The Coast Guard is out here too, in faster, stronger vessels. One engine failure, miles from shore, and you would simply vanish into the cold water. Your only hope was to be faster or smarter than the patrols. In a place like Detroit, the water was a highway. Historians tell us that 75% of all illegal liquor came across the border from Canada. But that highway was controlled by the violent Purple Gang. You either paid them for protection or you risked becoming one of the estimated 500 rivals they eliminated. There was no safe path. Every route had its own gatekeeper, and the price of passage was always high. Or maybe you were a border runner on the ground, using the dusty roads from Mexico or the forest trails from Canada. Your daily life was a series of tense encounters. You're handing a bribe to a border official, hoping he's not secretly setting you up. You're racing down a dark road, hoping a rival crew doesn't try to hijack your truck. And you know that some federal agents out here have orders to shoot on sight. In the end, it didn't matter where you were. Every region had its own unique nightmare. Now, to survive in this world, you needed more than just courage. The truth was, you needed the skills of 3 different experts rolled into one. First, you had to be a chemist. You needed to understand distillation, knowing that a small mistake could produce deadly methanol instead of drinkable ethanol. But you didn't have a lab. Your quality control was a quick taste, or the hope that your customers wouldn't go blind. You were always just one bad batch away from disaster. Next, you had to be a master mechanic. That car you used for deliveries wasn't just for getting around. It was your escape vehicle. You had to know how to fix it in the dark, on the side of a dirt road, with federal agents just minutes behind you. Imagine modifying your truck's floorboards to create secret compartments, or repairing a busted engine with nothing but a wrench and sheer desperation. Your life literally depended on your ability to work under that kind of pressure. And on top of all that, you had to be a CEO. You were running a complex business with no legal protections. Your supply chain was a network of whispers and handshakes. Your human resources department was a web of bribes paid to local officials. You had to manage your finances, negotiate territory with violent men, and somehow plan for the future in a business where the future wasn't guaranteed to exist. Somehow, people managed this balancing act every single day. But here's the thing. The psychological requirements were even tougher. Violence was a standard business practice. You had to be willing to protect your territory, and you knew what that meant. It meant intimidating rivals. It meant dealing with informants. Every successful bootlegger had to make a cold calculation about their willingness to use force to survive. It was just part of the job description. So you learned to live with a constant, quiet hum of paranoia. Picture yourself trying to sleep. Every creak of the floorboards could be a rival gang or a federal agent. Every car that slows down on your street makes your heart beat a little faster. You plan your escape routes before you even get into bed. You just can't trust anyone completely. This constant state of hypervigilance wears you down, day by day, month by month. In the end, this life required a certain moral flexibility. You were selling a product that you knew could be poisonous. You were bribing police officers and government agents, breaking the very laws that held society together. And you were actively working to destroy the businesses and lives of your competitors. Most people who got into this business weren't evil. They were just trying to survive. But the work itself changed them, forcing them into a gray world where right and wrong were dangerously blurry. Finally, there were the raw physical demands. Tending a still isn't something you can walk away from. It requires constant attention, sometimes for 24 hours straight. You feel the exhaustion deep in your bones, your eyes burning from lack of sleep and chemical fumes. Deliveries happened at night, meaning your days and nights were completely flipped. And all of this involves heavy lifting. Sacks of corn, crates of bottles, heavy copper equipment. There are no forklifts here. It's just your back, and the promise of a payday. And let's not forget the driving. This wasn't a leisurely Sunday drive. This was survival. Imagine racing down a pitch-black dirt road, your headlights off to avoid detection. You can hear another car behind you, getting closer. Your hands are slick with sweat on the steering wheel. You had to be a professional stunt driver just to make a delivery. It was an unofficial, but absolutely critical, part of the skill set. Now, you might think of the famous names, like Al Capone, and see a path to success. But the truth was, you weren't them. Capone's operation was on another planet compared to yours. While you were scraping by, he was spending $500,000 every month just on bribes. He had a private army armed with military-grade weapons. You had your cousin Earl watching the front door. He was a corporation. You were a corner store. And here's the thing. Even with all that power, Capone couldn't escape. He wasn't brought down by a rival gang, but by an accountant. He was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison for tax evasion. Sickness rotted his mind, and he died at just 48 years old. His massive, complex organization simply collapsed without him. In the end, his story is not a blueprint for success. It's a cautionary tale about how no one truly wins this game. Or perhaps you admired someone like Roy Olmsted in Seattle. They called him the gentleman bootlegger. He was a former police lieutenant who used his inside knowledge to build a massive, non-violent empire. He used sophisticated radio technology to coordinate his ships, But that very technology was his undoing. Federal agents simply tapped his communications and listened to everything. A trusted insider provided all the business records they needed. Olmsted didn't die in a shootout, but his life was ruined all the same. He lost his fortune, his reputation, and his place in society. Then there was George Remus, the king of the bootleggers. For a time, he was on top of the world, controlling a third of all the illegal liquor in America. He employed thousands of people. He was a lawyer who thought he was smarter than the law. But while he was serving a short prison sentence, his world was stolen from him. His wife and a federal agent sold off his entire multi-million-dollar empire. When he was released, the man who was once a king had only $100 to his name. The betrayal drove him to murder and sealed his tragic fate. And finally, you have the cautionary tale of Detroit's Purple Gang. They were the masters of violence, dominating the lucrative Canadian border and killing hundreds of competitors. They seemed unstoppable. But in the end, their greatest enemy was themselves. The same paranoia and greed that fueled their rise led to a bloody civil war. At the Collingwood Manor massacre, members of the gang executed their own partners at a supposed peace meeting. Their organization didn't get taken down. It simply ate itself alive. Now, let's just look at the simple math of your survival. The truth was, the numbers were never in your favor. First, there was the poison. Historians estimate more than 50,000 Americans died from contaminated liquor. You knew that every batch you sold could be part of that statistic. Then there was the violence. In Chicago alone, there were over 700 gangland murders. You heard the stories, you knew the names, and you couldn't forget the daily risk of your own equipment. A simple still explosion or exposure to toxic fumes could kill you just as easily as a rival's bullet. But here's the thing. Even if you survived, you were constantly dodging the law. Over the course of Prohibition, federal agents made nearly 600,000 arrests, and if you were arrested, your chances were not good. The conviction rate was almost 2/3. A prison sentence of 2 to 4 years was common. Imagine the cold dread of knowing that every single day you were rolling the dice against those kinds of odds. It was a statistical impossibility that you could do this forever and not get caught. And what happened if you were caught? They didn't just take you. They took everything you had built. Imagine watching agents smash the still you spent months piecing together. It was just one of 1.6 million stills the government confiscated. You see your delivery car, the one you knew how to fix in the dark, towed away. It's one of 45,000 cars seized. Your entire operation, worth maybe a few $1,000s, is wiped out in an afternoon. All your work, all your risk, just gone. In the end, economic failure was your most likely fate. The federal government spent over $300 million to put you out of business. You, meanwhile, were spending half of your income just on bribes and protection money. If you got arrested, your legal fees could wipe you out. The truth was, for every bootlegger who made a fortune, countless others went bankrupt. You weren't a gangster. You were a small business owner in an industry where the cost of operation was designed to be impossibly high. Just picture this. It's 1925. And your morning alarm is the sound of a truck backfiring on the street. You don't just roll over. You sit up, your heart pounding, and you listen. Your first thought isn't about coffee. It's about whether that was a federal raid starting. You glance at the window, checking your escape route. You strain to hear if your lookout is still where he's supposed to be. Your day doesn't begin with a stretch. It begins with a threat assessment. Your workday is a quiet hum of fear. You check the connections on your still, your hands feeling the cool metal. You pray today isn't the day it explodes. You smell every batch of raw alcohol you buy, trying to detect the chemical taint of poison. Then you move to your car. You check the engine, the tires, the fuel. You plan your delivery route, and then a backup route, and a backup for that. Every step of your process, from production to transport, is laced with the quiet terror that one small mistake could be your last. As darkness falls, your real work begins. Imagine driving down a pitch-black country road, your headlights off, your eyes strained to see, your knuckles white on the steering wheel. Every shadow looks like a federal agent or a hijacker. You make your stops at the speakeasies, dealing only in cash. Then you have your meetings. You slip a greasy roll of bills to a police captain in a dark alley. You negotiate territory with a man who has a pistol tucked in his belt. This is your life now. A series of tense, whispered conversations in the dark. And finally, you try to sleep, but your mind doesn't shut down. You lie in bed, but you aren't resting. You're listening. Your money is stashed near the door with a loaded pistol. You've taught your family what to do if they hear strange noises. You've even thought about who will get what little you have when the inevitable finally happens. Sleep doesn't bring peace. It's just a paranoid, watchful pause before you have to wake up and do it all over again. Now, the cost of this life wasn't just measured in bodies, it was measured in broken families. Picture your own children. They might have nicer clothes than their friends, but they live with a quiet stigma. They see the whispers from other parents. They feel the tension in your home, and they live with the constant, unspoken fear that one night, you might not come home from work. And if you're arrested and your assets are seized, their world collapses overnight. The trauma of it all stays with them long after the money is gone. And what about your spouse? They are living their own quiet nightmare. They live in constant terror of a knock on the door, of becoming a widow in an instant. They become isolated, cut off from normal friends and family who don't understand your life. They have no legal protections. If you die, they have no claim to your hidden money. The story of Imogen Remus, who helped destroy her husband's empire, shows the terrible choices people faced. Your spouse's survival might depend on betraying you, but the impact ripples out into your whole community. Your neighborhood is no longer just a place to live. It's a war zone. You hear about civilian casualties, innocent people caught in the crossfire of a gang shootout. You see the damage from a nearby basement still that exploded. You learn not to trust the local police, because you know they're on someone's payroll. Your illegal business injects a poison of fear and corruption into the very streets where your family lives. And then there is the literal poison. The people drinking in the speakeasies are your customers, but you know that the industrial alcohol you're buying could be contaminated. You hear the stories of people going blind or dying in agony at the city hospital. You see the victims of Jamaica Ginger, their legs paralyzed forever. The local medical system is completely overwhelmed. You are part of a system that is quietly devastating the very community you are trying to serve. The final cost is the one you pay yourself, inside your own mind. The constant hypervigilance begins to break you down. You see it in the story of George Remus, who became so paranoid he started speaking about himself in the third person. You find yourself drinking your own product just to calm your nerves enough to sleep. You become isolated, unable to form real connections with anyone outside your dangerous world. Your mind becomes a prison of suspicion. In the end, this life requires a slow, steady moral decay. You start out just breaking one law. Then you find yourself bribing a police officer. Soon, you're knowingly selling a product that could be poison. You justify violence against competitors to protect your family. Before you know it, you are betraying people you once trusted, because you know they would do the same to you. The person you were before all this began simply fades away. Now, let's be honest about your chances. The truth was, you weren't just fighting men. You were fighting technology. The federal government had communication systems you could only dream of. While you relied on secret meetings and whispered passwords, they had coordinated radio networks. Imagine federal agents listening to your phone calls through wiretaps, just like they did to Roy Olmsted. Every word you spoke could become evidence against you. The government's advantage on the move was even greater. If you were a rum runner, your fast speedboat felt powerful. But the Coast Guard had Navy destroyers. If you were driving, your souped-up car was fast. But they could coordinate a pursuit with multiple cars and even an airplane, all communicating by radio. You could be fast, but you couldn't be everywhere at once. There was, quite literally, no escape, and you were always being watched. You might not see the cameras, but they were there. The government had direction-finding equipment that could pinpoint the location of a hidden radio transmitter. They had agents taking photographs from windows across the street. And their informant networks were not just desperate people looking for a reward. They were professionally trained, feeding a constant stream of information back to headquarters. You were an amateur playing against professionals. Meanwhile, what was your technology? Your most important piece of equipment was probably a still made from an old car radiator, slowly leaking lead into your product. You had no safety valves, no temperature gauges, no quality control labs. You were practicing improvised chemistry, where one small mistake meant the difference between a celebration and a funeral. Your equipment wasn't just illegal, it was fundamentally unsafe. Your ability to communicate was your biggest vulnerability. Any radio transmission you made could be intercepted and traced. You had no way to send a secure message. This forced you to rely on face-to-face meetings. But every meeting was a massive risk. Was it a real deal, or was it a setup by federal agents? Or worse, was it an ambush by a rival crew? Every conversation was a roll of the dice. Finally, you had no financial safety net. You couldn't just deposit your thousands of dollars in cash at a bank without raising suspicion. You couldn't get insurance for your secret warehouse or your delivery trucks. And if a partner cheated you or a supplier stole your money, you had no legal recourse. You couldn't sue a criminal in a court of law. You were operating completely outside the system, with all of the risk and none of the protection. Now, every single day in this life was a series of impossible choices. Let's start with the product itself. You knew that proper distillation took time and expensive equipment, neither of which you had. A shortcut meant a bigger profit, but it also meant you risked creating methanol, a deadly poison. To make things worse, you knew the government was deliberately contaminating industrial alcohol supplies. You had no lab, no way to test for sure. Your choice was simple and terrible: take your time and risk being discovered, or rush the process and risk killing your customers. Then there was the choice of violence. You knew that carrying a weapon could turn a simple argument into a murder. But you also knew that being unarmed was an invitation to be robbed or killed. It was a spiral you couldn't escape. If you avoided violence, rivals saw you as weak and took your territory. If you used violence, you attracted the attention of federal investigators. There was no safe middle ground. The only choice was what kind of danger you were willing to face today. You also had to decide how big you wanted to get. You could try to stay small, under the radar. But that meant small profits, and you were always vulnerable to being pushed around by bigger players. So maybe you decide to expand. You take on more territory. But now you have more enemies. You have to pay more in bribes, and your success makes you a much bigger target for the federal government. Your choice was between starving in the shadows or being shot in the spotlight. And perhaps the most difficult choice of all involved your family. Do you bring them into the operation? If you do, you put them in direct physical danger. But if you don't, you risk them feeling resentful, or worse, becoming a security risk. You heard the stories. You knew a desperate family member could be offered immunity to become an informant against you. Your choice was agonizing. Do you protect your family by keeping them away, or do you protect your operation by keeping them close? But here is the final, quiet truth. While you were fighting your daily battles, the entire world was changing around you. The Great Depression hit, and suddenly, the government was desperate for the billions in lost liquor tax revenue. The public, once behind prohibition, was now horrified by the news. They read about the tens of thousands of poisoning deaths, the paralysis victims. The system was collapsing under its own weight. The courts were clogged, the prisons were full, and corruption was rampant. The end was coming, but it wasn't coming to save you. The truth was, your operation had a natural lifespan. If you were lucky, and skilled, and ruthless, you might last 2 years. Most didn't. The first 6 months were a learning curve where one mistake could kill you. If you survived that, your success just painted a bigger target on your back. It was a countdown. Eventually, an associate would get arrested and make a deal. A corrupt official would find a higher bidder. A rival would finally see an opening. Your clock was always ticking. And then, one day, it's over. The date is December 5th, 1933. You hear the news. The 21st Amendment has been ratified. Prohibition is repealed. People are celebrating in the streets. But you are not among them. The statistical reality is that you are most likely dead, in prison, or completely bankrupt. The big crime organizations might survive, shifting their operations into legitimate businesses. But you, the small-time operator, are left with nothing. There is no pension plan for a bootlegger. There is no triumphant ride into the sunset. The world that created you simply vanishes. And you, after years of living in constant terror, are simply forgotten. A forgotten casualty of a war that, in the end, had no real winners. So now that we're at the end of our journey, let's look at the final, cold arithmetic of it all. Over 50,000 people died from poisoned alcohol. Thousands more were killed in the violence. Hundreds died from simple workplace accidents, like an exploding still. The truth is, your chance of achieving what anyone might call success, simply avoiding death or prison for 5 years, was less than 1%. And the few who did manage to survive that long were almost always left bankrupt and broken. There was no golden parachute. There was no comfortable retirement. So why do we remember this era with a sense of glamour? It's because we've seen the movies. We focus on the handful of famous gangsters, not the thousands of forgotten people like you. We feel a certain nostalgia for a past that seems simpler, but was in fact brutally complex. But the reality you just lived through was never about glamour. It was about desperation. It was about ordinary people, cornered by economic necessity, making a series of impossible choices. The great lesson of prohibition is that sometimes a well-intentioned law can create a nightmare. It shows us that a black market will always demand a human price, violence and corruption will always follow, and that is why, in the end, you wouldn't have survived. You didn't have the combined skills of a chemist, a mechanic, and a CEO. The economics were designed for you to fail. The constant threat of violence was more than a normal person could endure, and you could never overcome the technology gap or the overwhelming resources of the government. In a world where trust was impossible, you ultimately had no one to rely on but yourself, and that was never going to be enough. But that world, with all its danger and paranoia, is gone now. We can look back on it from a place of safety. We can respect the resilience of the people who were caught in those impossible circumstances, and we can find a quiet comfort in knowing how it ended. Not with another gunfight, but with a peaceful, democratic change. History, for all its struggles, does eventually move forward, and you are safe now from that time. The danger has passed. There is nothing left for you to worry about. There is nothing left for you to do but rest.